My name is Jason Dell. I'm a Security Practice Manager for Network Solutions. And as we talked about before, we were going to do this in person. And I have handouts that I'm hoping were sent to you over email or a link to them. So this is, we're going to be using these just like we would as if we were meeting in person. And the printout is the County Commissioner's Cybersecurity Workshop. Well, let's get cooking. So anyway, the chat window is, I'll be asking you for feedback again throughout this presentation, just so that you can help us help each other to make this really good. And the Q&A is where you post questions. Any kind of questions as I'm going through this, or any of our presenters are going through this. If you have any questions you need us to elaborate on, then you can put that in the Q&A window. And at the end of each segments, we will answer those Q&A questions. So the first thing we need to do is understand a justification for cybersecurity. Why invest the time and effort and money into security in the first place? The obvious initial answer is to reduce risk to your data assets. So, these are the assets that are very important to you, and you need them to keep your business running. And the second part of it is, being a government entity, you are part of a greater national government. And so an attack on your entity is an attack on really our country. So you're a part of national security. So it's important that we understand and we do our due diligence to protect you the best we can. And at this point, ignorance is negligence. We need to understand it and do our due diligence to protect the best we can. So it's time to get on board. And really, when you think about it, security does not need to be so confusing and so complex. At first, it seems like this picture, just a mass of screens and data, difficult to understand and difficult to discern unless you have somebody that lives and breathes in it all day long. But it's like anything else that's complex. If you break it down into smaller components, then it's easier to understand and explain. But really, the concept there should be able to be understood by anybody. So as you're considering your security investments, ask a lot of questions until you understand what it is that you're doing, what it is you have in place, and what it is you're investing in to make sure you're getting the best out of your investments. Okay, so can you, in your chat window, let me know if you have printed or have the ability to print your County Commissioner's Cybersecurity Workshop? Just pop in a yes or no, or need a link or something so I can, because we'll need that really to get cooking. So the first thing you want to do before, in the process of developing your security plan is to identify what your data assets are. So your data assets are really, it's not so much what kind of systems you have, but what it is you're trying to protect. What data, if compromised, would cause a negative impact? So on the handout that's on this first page, it says identify, right? And you would just list over here what those data assets are, okay? So I've given a couple very generic examples, accounts, records, and here's where I need your participation. So if you can please in the chat window, or if you don't have access to chat in the Q&A, just pop in there what you consider data assets. What kind of data? Remember, we're not systems or applications. We're talking about what kind of data is meant to be confidential and needs to be protected. So this can be any kind of records you have, and you can be specific about that. Social security numbers, excellent. Yes, very good. That's part of personal identifiable information. SVRS. Amy, can you spell that out for at least me? For the rest of you probably know what that means. Okay, there's Kevin, thank you. Utility accounts, good things. Yeah, so this is why I want this to be interactive, so you guys can kind of think of from each other of what's a good idea to consider. State voter registration system, thank you. Oh yeah, yes, of course. Yes, yeah, good. Any other ideas for data assets? I was working with one county government, and they were protecting the body cam data, all financial records, right? So I was just telling you, they were protecting the body data records that the policemen when they would walk around. Okay, any HIPAA information? Good. Some others? Any others in here? Kind of data. So everyone look at everyone else's, excuse me, ideas here, what they have. Yes, security camera recordings, exactly. Very good, very good. So those are the kind of things, just jot those down if you don't have the thing, the worksheet printed out in front of you. Maybe just grab a scratch pad or pack of Post-it notes or whatever and write some of these ideas down, and you can scroll through the chat window. And again, you can use Q&A if you are having trouble finding chat. Good. Any other data? Good. Okay. Thank you very much for that feedback. That's very helpful for everybody, and it's helpful for me too to be able, when I'm talking to you guys, to know what you know, what to protect. So the next thing we talk about, and this is the next column on still the identify page, or we identify the risks. So what can happen? Okay. So the first part of risk are what can happen to your data. And I've sort of given that answer to you: theft, damage, ransom. Those are the big three. I mean, everything else is kind of a variant of theft, damage, or ransom. What I mean by ransom is ransomware, or in some ways hold your data captive until you pay up some means of currency or something. Okay, so these are the things we're trying to keep from happening. And then the second part of risk, and if anybody has any other risks of this category of what can happen to your data, let's go ahead and pop it into chat. But I'm going to move ahead while we're doing that. And then the next part of risks, and that's this third column. And I guess I should ask, can you guys see this document when I move it up here? Just one of you give me a yes to know that
yes.
Anybody?
Yeah, I see it. Fine.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm having to move it on and off the screen. So that third column is what happens when that data is compromised. What are the repercussions? What are the ramifications? So these apply to any type of company that I have up here. Reputation and image damage, remediation costs, litigation, somebody could lose their job. What other things can happen? What other impact can there be from a breach of data? So if you'll pop that in the chat window to give some other guys some other ideas of what kind of costs or results can be from compromise. What else can happen? What else do you think can happen as a result? You know, you see what happens to a lot of these manufacturing companies or storefronts that get hacked. What happens to them when they get compromised? What are the negative repercussions? Okay. How about loss of service? So now the next page, we'll move on up to the next page here, are current controls. So the current controls are what controls do you have in place already? That's this next column on this, I don't know, we're on third page maybe? Yeah, fourth, I guess. So what current controls do you have in place? And when I say controls, I don't necessarily mean technology only. A security policy, a written security policy, a remediation procedure. What do you do when you're hacked? Cyber insurance. Those are non-technical controls that you can maintain. Thanks, Kevin, for that feedback. If you guys can acknowledge that under risks. For your controls there are non-technical controls like what I have here, these written things, and these other investments. And then there are technical controls. So these are your, and don't list in your worksheet there, don't list the manufacturer yet. We're just talking generic. What do you have? Well, we have a firewall in place. We have web security in place. We have email security. We have endpoint security. What other types of controls do you have in place? Technical or non-technical? And again, don't list specific vendors. Routine scale-ups. Good. What else do you guys have in place in your security portfolio to try to prevent breach of data? If you want to pop that in your chat window. Yeah, I'll keep going while you guys can keep an eye on that and help to pop it. Cyber training, good. Range, oh yes, the cyber range, good. Phishing campaign, employee training, excellent. All good. So you guys all learn from each other there of some good controls to help protect your data. Employee training, yes, very good. Excellent. Okay, so keep them coming there. And in the meantime, let me get this out of the way. The next control is to map your data assets to current controls. And if you think, gosh, this is really basic, what's Jason doing here, boring me to death with this basics? Sometimes you really need to break it down to the very basics to understand what it is we're trying to do and whether it makes sense of what we're doing, or are we just 9 steps ahead without really looking at the basics. So here we're mapping our data assets to our current controls. So these are the assets that you've listed up here, right? The assets that you were trying to protect. So your current control, and this is a really tiny space to put this, so, you know, bear with me, or it's okay if you cross the lines. So this is where we're trying to say, what does this control protect? What does web security protect? What does email security protect? You know, so these are what you're listing out here, your current controls you have in place now, and then what are they protecting exactly? The point of this is to understand the relevancy of your current controls. Are they protecting your data assets? So now on to the next column is how effective are each of your controls and how relevant are each of your controls. So what we're trying to do is to understand the efficacy. That's a fun word. And basically it's I don't know, you can call it a combination of how effective it is and how relevant it is. Right? So you can just put down on my web security is awesome, my firewall is really great, my web security needs some works, I have no email security. Put the things you don't have. And I have some good suggestions down here. You know, you could set for your efficacy suggestions, you could have it's excellent/relevant, adequate/relevant, relevant/inadequate, relevant/obsolete, or non-existent. So what does relevant mean? Well, it definitely does pertain to a particular data asset. But obsolete, it means it's old, it's 10 years old and it hasn't been updated. I hope you don't have something 10 years old that hasn't been updated. That's not going to be effective. So this is what we're trying to do, and we're trying to list, do we have any controls out there that aren't protecting anything, or that aren't effective? Okay, so this is important for our next screen here, and I need to go down and advance my slide to recognize your security control gaps. So here's where we're going to list all of our potential relevant security controls. Okay, so, and we've already listed a lot of these in the chat, but these are the things that I could think of. And then you all gave me some great ideas as well, right? Written security policy, remediation policy, cybersecurity insurance, next generation firewall. If we have time in my slide, I'll explain what I mean by next generation firewall instead of just a firewall. Email security, internet application security, including web security. Just FYI, top 2 threat vectors right here, email and web security. And email security is the #1 method of contracting ransomware. Right, so those two are very important. And oftentimes, especially email security, people don't pay attention to it. You know, maybe they have some spam control or they're not putting enough effort on it. Endpoint security, antivirus, maybe you have some other endpoint security products to watch out for threats there. This one is a mouthful. Identity management, multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, password management. Not only did I do this because I didn't have enough room to put more than one, rows on the page here, but primarily because this all falls under access control. It's all really trying to keep people, or you only want to limit authorized people to get on your network, to connect to your network and to your applications, and not just let anybody get on there. So identity management is really who and what are you, and and the method of connection to a network, wired, wireless, or VPN. Y'all know what multi-factor authentication is, whether that's a push authentication or you have to open up some app and put in a 4 or 5 digit code, or you have a fob of some sort that provides that code for you. Single sign-on is important too when you're trying to onboard, and this is the word offboard employees as well, to make sure that you have a quick seal up whenever somebody has to leave your place of employment. And password management too, very important too, because as we're putting in policy to justify long passwords, difficult to remember those, and it's also difficult to ask people not to write those down and keep them somewhere, or keep them in Post-it notes or whatever. So a password management is a much better idea than that. Network traffic threat detection is basically eyes on your network that watches the traffic and look for threats. And then cloud security. More and more applications going into the cloud, right? So how do you protect those that are not on your network, right? On your LAN at least. How do you protect access to those cloud resources, and how do you mandate policy as to what can be stored in those cloud resources, right? So that's just cloud security. And in managed security services, this is something to consider when you have, you're considering putting in all these controls, but maybe you don't have the technical resources to do it. You might partner with a company like Network Solutions to provide managed security services to help you manage and control your security controls, manage your controls. So this, again, is just spilling out in no particular order, particular controls that you might have in place. And then over here, this is where you prioritize those, right? What's important? And this is kind of where the rubber meets the road here. We need to understand from taking in the data that's up here, how the level of efficacy for each of your controls compared to what's available out there, what you need to work on first. I'll give an example that won't apply to everybody, but just a hypothetical. You might say, I don't have any email security at all. Okay, so, and I'm saying do a pencil because as you go through this, you might decide to shift things around. That's pretty important to have email security. So that might be your number one. If your firewall, you have a firewall, but it's an old, tired firewall. It's a stateful firewall instead of a next generation firewall. Again, if I have time, I'll go over what that means. You might put that up here as number two, because remember, if you have the control in place, even if it's not as effective as you like, it's much better than not having the control. So the fact that you didn't have any email security still makes email security number one, and then your firewall needs to be replaced number two. Okay, you know what I'm saying? So, and if you find something is missing altogether or is obsolete, or if you have a control and you're completely happy with it, that's low down on the list. All right, so you're good to go with those. But also list over here, we're still trying to keep track of the things that map to nothing, and for your controls that don't map it to any data assets. And the reason for that is you don't need to keep subscribing to some control if it's something that is a subscription base. If it's not effectively protecting your data assets, reducing risk, save that cost and think about what else you might need to invest that in. Okay. So does this make sense right now? If anyone has any questions, pop it into the Q&A. Just want to make sure I'm tracking with everyone. Come down here and give you the more interesting looking. Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right. So now we're going to develop a security strategy. And this page does not correlate with any of the pages in the worksheet. It's an example of what a security strategy is, and it's very, very high level, kind of an executive summary, if you will. So here's an example of what it might be. Okay, you're going to write or revise missing, inaccurate, or obsolete documentation, procedures, and policies. Yes, that's a mouthful. Those were those controls that were non-technical, right, written. Okay, so it just means people have to sit down and figure it out. You may be able to do that on your own. You might need to get with your security partner for consultation services, right, to sit down and help you figure out what do you have in place and is it adequate. Prune ineffective technology products or services. So again, a control, this one's a technical control, right? So what do you have in place that you don't need so you can get rid of and recoup the cost of that, right? Add missing technology products or services. You need a control, you have nothing in place. Obviously that needs to go in there. In the final letter, replace obsolete technology products or services. Where you have something in place, it's there, it checks the box, but it needs to be better. Okay, so just high level security strategy. This is where we're going to get done. Okay, so again, any questions at any time, pop it into the Q&A or the chat if you don't have access to Q&A, I guess. Security strategy worksheet. Okay, so I'm going to bring this guy up here. this page gives instructions on how to do this page. Okay, so I'll go through it real quick, but I'm going to use the slide instead. So the first 3 columns, I guess I'll bring this up real quick. The first 3 columns are what this current slide pertains to. Okay, and the first column is list your prioritized remaining control gaps. So that's easy. That's just copying straight down from what you have up here. And the reason I'm having you put it down there is because we're going to be using these columns next to it for some correlation, so we can see, you know, correlations side by side. So you're just relisting your control gaps in this sheet, okay? And then the next one is list the matching policy, procedure, or technology product. Here's where you're listing what it is. Okay, it's next to your firewall or your written security policy. Obviously, you just write written security policy, remediation procedure, remediation procedure. Next to your firewall, you might say, I have a Cisco ASA 5500 or a Palo Alto or a Sonic wall under, you know, model numbers. Under your web security, list what you have in place. You're using Umbrella, you're using Cisco Web Security Appliance, you're using some other web security product. You know, these are where you're listing actually what the products are, just so you have an idea what this is. And then your next column is evaluate the policy, procedure, technology product, whether you're going to keep, replace, or decommission. Okay, again, you're referring to your previous slides to decide whether you're going to lose it or whether you're going to keep it. And you may need to go beyond these, you know, just 12 rows here. Okay, so then the next one is, okay, this is an important one to consider. So, that keeps popping up. So this last column here is in-house skill set sufficient to implement and support? Otherwise, what is the cost to contract? There's a completely unreasonable amount of space to put all that information, but just to give you a visual of what's going on here. This is what I mean. Is your team skilled enough to implement or support each technology that needs to be implemented, respectively? So evaluate what's the cost and the time to train your team to implement and support it, or maybe you don't have a team. And if you don't, what's the cost and the time to contract implementation? To go to a company, say like Network Solutions, to say, we need this, we need you to help us implement it. And then in addition to that are the ongoing costs, meaning what's the ongoing cost and time to contract support for managed services, meaning, okay, we know we need these things, but we're just not going to have the skill set or the warm bodies and seats to actually support these security products, so we're going to have to contract somebody like Network Solutions to support these products. Okay, this is just to help you evaluate the cost, bringing it down to just cost. So, you know, and that's why we're mapping this, and you can see in the sheet now, here's the control gap, here's the technology, here's what we want to do with it, and then here's where you weigh your costs here, just to help you visualize it on one page of what we need to do and what the costs will be. Okay, and then develop a gap remediation plan. So now we move on to the next page, and we kind of bring all this, and really this page before, when you really fill it out, it's going to be full of data. And like I said, so it's just a visual to give you an idea what you're looking for. And on your next one, we'll plan out how to do the remediation here. So Milestone may include, you know, several products. I want to put in email security and web security, and I want to do this at this particular time. So we'll have a milestone here, whatever we want to call this milestone. We're going to put these technology products in here. The implementation cost, and actually that's meant to say, I apologize for that, I just saw that last night, the ongoing cost, not the remediation cost, but the cost to support it. That's what's meant to be in this. And when you want to implement this, just to give you some milestones, because you can't really eat the elephant all at once, you got to eat it one bite at a time. Right? It might not be realistic to say we want to get next generation firewall, we're going to get web security, email security, we're going to do this all in 2020. Maybe that's too much. So prioritize, that's why we prioritized here to figure out what we need to do first is to help come up with a 1-year, 3-year, and a 5-year plan, right? So this is what we're going to do. And this will help you create then, let me switch over to my slide real quick. When you establish these milestones, you can calculate the cost of each milestone collectively, or rather respectively, each milestone. Then you can draft a 1-year, 3-year, and a 5-year implementation plan with the costs and create an executive summary. Why do we want to do an executive summary? Because you're going to be bringing this up to your decision makers with a plan to say, we need to invest in security. And if you tell them we need to get a next generation firewall and we need to get application security and cloud security, that they may get this glazed look in their eyes like, I don't know what you're saying. All I know is that's a very large number. So if you tell them instead, I need this amount of money to reduce the risks to our name your asset or assets, then they're going to hear that and say, oh, okay, well, I know what all that means. Once you create your executive summary, then you can present to leadership for approval. And then if they come back and say, no, too much, then it's time to go back to your milestones here and revise these and break it down so it's more digestible. Okay. Right. Then your execution of your gap remediation plan basically is just, okay, now it's time to roll this out. So keep your final goal in mind. Try hard to complete one milestone before starting another, just for kind of sanity's sake, right? You don't want to keep blending into the next one. Try to wrap one up or develop your milestones in such a way that they can be completed, wrapped up. Now we're ready to move on to the next one. Maybe your first milestone will be just year 1. Your next milestone will be year 2. Or maybe you can get a couple of milestones done in 1 year, first 6 months, next 6 months. Okay. And then you really need to repeat this cycle at least annually. So if you say to yourself, well, hold on, my first milestone is going to take 2 years to implement. Well, that might be a thing. But annually, at least go through the process and see where you're at, and check where you're at, and see, because every year your threat landscape may change, your data assets may change, right? Your risks may change. So keep revising that and controlling it to make sure that you're going down the right path, and you're going to be happy with the results when you're done. Okay. A written security policy really. That should be done soon, and it should be pretty low cost. If you don't have a written security policy, start very basic. Don't try to make a ponderous tome out of the gate. Just go through and write down what it is you're trying to accomplish. If you need a hand with some ideas, reach out to Network Solutions. We'll give you some suggestions. We'll give you some templates. You can, if you try to Google it, you're going to find some things on websites, and they're going to be big and ponderous. It does not need to be a big, ponderous security policy. It just needs to say what it is you're trying to accomplish. You're trying to protect these data assets, and you don't even need to list your products in there. You just say you're trying to make, part of your written security policy might be your acceptable use policy. Right, where you have your employees sign some documentation saying they won't misbehave on your network while they're connected or using your resources. You might say that people need to do passwords or to lock their screen or to not leave their laptops laying around. It's meant to be very basic, non-technical language. Written security policy should revise it at least annually. And then a remediation plan really should be a remediation policy, procedure rather. And that remediation procedure is, that's what you put behind the glass in case of emergency, break glass. So the time to figure out when to do that is not when you're in the middle of a breach, because everyone's kind of panicking at that point, right? So have a company in mind, a plan, what we're going to do. We're going to gather our logs. We're going to call our partner to help us, go through breach remediation, and then we're going to execute. So go through a dry run of that if possible. And revise that. It'll pay off when time comes, if the time comes that you have to go through a breach, when you can just execute this plan. And try and develop it on the fly is not fun at all. Cybersecurity insurance, good idea. Most of you probably already have it, but trying to kick out the money to pay for a breach can be a bit painful if you're not budgeting for it. So Get together with, find a few of them, compare what makes sense, have something in plan. Make sure you talk to them about who your remediation partner is to make sure they will support them, just like any other insurance policy, right? They might only support, or remediation companies might only support certain insurance companies, back and forth. So just make sure that these two are talking to each other. So again, there's a smooth transition if there's a problem. So I'll talk real quick. A next generation firewall. The difference between a next generation firewall and a stateful firewall is as follows. Stateful firewall is what's been around for years and years and years. And the next generation firewall came out, I don't know, a few years ago, maybe 5. Maybe not quite that long. A stateful firewall can only tell, I'll have to go a little technical here, so bear with me, can only tell what addresses you're coming from, what addresses you're going to, and what protocols you're using. And that is it. So it's not really meant to detect threats within those permitted protocols. For example, if you allow web traffic out, HTTP, HTTPS, there's all kinds of threats that can happen through HTTP and HTTPS, right? But a stateful firewall can't see and identify what applications those are. But a next generation firewall can. It uses deep packet inspection to watch that traffic and identify applications that are going across your network. So it can learn what kind of endpoints you have on your network, what type of computers you have, what operating systems, what IoT devices, what BYOD devices you have, what kind of applications, what level of applications. And oftentimes it knows what versions each of those applications are. And so with that, it's going to, since it's continuously connected to security intelligence, a massive threat intelligence global database, it knows, okay, these are the applications, this is the picture of your particular network environment. And it knows the threats that are pertaining to your specific applications and endpoints. And then it can turn on the defenses dynamically for just the things that are within your network and disable the things that are not in your network to keep it tuned. So next generation firewall, very smart self-tuning, something to put at the internet edge. The limitation of the next generation firewall is it's at the internet edge. Traffic has to go through this device in order to protect you. So if you're working from home like most of us are right now, the next generation firewall at work is not going to help you unless you're coming through somehow. If you're doing a VPN in and coming through that firewall, then it can protect you. But if you go and say straight to cloud resources, next generation firewall at the home is not going to help you. And most people don't have next generation firewall in their home office because it's a little salty, with the exception of a few that are like, I'll just give one like a Meraki firewall. That's great for home office and does include some next generation firewall capabilities. Email security, you'll understand what that is. It's more than just spam. It's of course anti-malware, but efficacy is very important. The email security that comes with the provider may not be sufficient. So you might need to go above and beyond that and have some third-party email security. Okay. Internet application really is web security, but above web security, it also protects devices. Anything that accesses the web, or the internet, I should say. So IoT devices, your smart light bulbs, your smart HVAC controllers, your smart electric outlets, blinds, windows, door locks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Any of those things that need to get to the internet, of course, those are threats. And so your internet application security product protects those devices from, it protects your network from those devices, and it also protects those devices from attack. Okay, because some of those devices aren't frivolous. Some of those are very important, like door locks, right, or window locks and such. Endpoint security basically is, your antivirus or anti-malware. I talked about this one already. Yeah. Okay. Great. If any of you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Alrighty, then you can continue to, if you think of other questions, you can continue to put those in the Q&A.